Housing has been neglected, left to get worse, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. The president called for $40 billion. We are calling for at least $80 billion, double what the president has called for.
We have to keep Section 9. Right now, the chairman of the Housing Authority is systematically behind all our backs, going into developments, lying to residents about why we need to get that blueprint passed and why we need to accept the RAD by private developers. The ones that become lucrative in the whole mush is the private developers.
Parliamentarian veto can, be a convenient fig leaf for certain policies.
When you say that an issue might not be appropriate for reconciliation, what do you mean by that? What is the criteria? Is it objective or is it subjective?
It's a really great question. The kind of the phrase that people use generally is it's going to have an impact on the federal budget. Oversight and audit measures are going to be a little tough, but it's certainly a priority of ours. It can be just based on a decision by the parliamentarian.
Yeah, I would say falling back on the parliamentarian as a scapegoat for an excuse is just cowardly, because we know they have no power. We know that the Republicans fired the parliamentarian back in the day when they didn't agree with their decision. So that person is really just a figurehead that, I think everyone, at least someone involved in politics, knows that with the $15 minimum wage, that was one of the fakest excuses ever. So I wouldn't rely on the Senate parliamentarian's opinion for anything, because, like you said, everyone can kind of make an argument. Politics is the art of BSing, and everyone can kind of BS their way. That's what the elastic clause in the Constitution is all about. So if there's any excuses made for not protecting Section 9, we know that it could have been done, that an excuse could have been made. The next mayor of New York City is going to support the blueprint. So if Leader Schumer does not craft a workaround to classify saving Section 9 as a budget issue, can we assume that was intentional?
Can you assume? If that were ever to happen, I can't imagine it wouldn't be intentional. But just from our reports about conversations with the parliamentarian, I don't foresee that being an issue. So if for whatever reason, a big investment in Section 9 public housing did not happen, there would, either the entire reconciliation bill was scuttled, or some other, drastic occurrence that I am having trouble even picturing.
Well, we just established that the parliamentarian is the scapegoat, right? So if we fall back on that excuse,
so I want to just correct some of those things that you said. I think you're miscategorizing the relationship with the parliamentarian, also who the parliamentarian is, right? Like, the parliamentarian is not a scapegoat, right? That person is put in that place because they do have these rules, right? And obviously there has been complicated histories with past parliamentarians, but we wouldn't be using them as a scapegoat for that, right? That has a lot of negative implications, or that we're trying to make excuses for something, and that would never be the case, right? There are obviously more complicated factors into all of this, and like Ryan said, we think things will be okay, hopefully, but it's never going to be us intentionally removing it. That would be absurd and a mischaracterization of his entire operation and him as a person. So that's definitely, that would never be the case. We would never take something out intentionally if that could be put in.
Like the $15 minimum wage that the Senate parliamentarian was used as an excuse?
But that's because it wasn't reconcilable because of how it affects states, right? So, for instance, the Social Security Administration cannot be reformed through reconciliation because that then goes to states, right? That's why the $15 minimum wage, because it was not reconcilable because of what it impacts on the rest of the states' rights. That's what happens.
But they could have fired the parliamentarian and rehired a new one in that case that would have aligned with their views.
That probably would have made the same exact conclusion.
And it's not just me saying this. This is a very common perception of the position of the parliamentarian. Ever since the $15 minimum wage, that position has become somewhat of a meme, and people have referred to the Tea Party's actions as being more aggressive than the current Democratic Party leadership. So they could play hardball on that, they're just choosing not to. I think we should know right now if Leader Schumer is willing to force a vote on the protection of Section 9 housing after the potential failure of this reconciliation bill.
If we were just going to bring up either Nydia Velázquez's or Warren's bill on the floor for a vote, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, if the reconciliation bill fails, I mean, I think our options would be severely limited.
Nydia, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Will this prevent RAD from existing in New York City?
Well, the reason that NYCHA has come up with RAD is because of the lack of resources and investment from the federal government. If we get this money, there is no reason for RAD. The NYCHA or any agency or city government should not be in the business of selling public assets.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Mel. I couldn't be, we're honored to be here. This is the place to be because what we're talking about here is fundamentally changing NYCHA so that people either can no longer live there, largely will be privatized, and people, as Mel said, won't be able to ensure that their kids can have the same housing stability that they've had. We don't trust Greg Russ, the head of NYCHA, his plan. We don't trust the leadership of the city. And it's no surprise why, when during the height of the pandemic, you had leaders from NYCHA going building to building, either trying to get folks to sign on to RAD under duress, or the number of buildings that have had outages of gas for months at a time. In my neighborhood, Fulton, for example. We can't trust the leadership. We can't trust the mayor. What we need is for our leadership at the congressional level, Chuck Schumer, our senator, majority leader, and Nydia Velázquez, who's really led on fully funding NYCHA legislation in the House. We need to support their plan. We need to ignore and tell our local leaders to support the federal aid program because the only way to ensure NYCHA residents a better quality of life and a future for NYCHA and their kids and grandkids is to get the full $40 billion that New York City's public housing is owed. It's what's owed, it's what's right, and both the federal and the state, all local government, has basically lost the trust of people. And now we need to make it right by passing that legislation and getting the $40 billion to make it right for NYCHA.
And I just want to say that having stood with Senator Schumer and Nydia a few months ago, I do want to note that NYCHA residents, we are holding him as the guardian of our lives, basically, and we're holding him to his word that when we stood there with him and held up the signs to fully fund NYCHA, we believed in him. And, come re-election, it's going to be dicey, and I have to have something, there has to be something concrete. I think this is Senator Schumer's time to really actually put into motion, instead of the words, reconciliation or let's do that. He has the chance to make history and to change this, to actually do something to end some of the racial disinvestment. No, it would by any means, it would never correct it in entirety. But, I think it's just important to remember that, we are holding Senator Schumer to his word.